Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for another video. Today I'm going to be answering the question of how to read biblical fiction. So if you guys have been subscribed to my channel or following me on my blog or following me on Instagram or any of my other social medias, then you know I'm a huge advocate for biblical fiction. I think it is such an amazing genre, and I think it's actually really an important genre to a lot of people, and I recommend it like 24/7. I also write it, so I'm not saying I'm biased, but the thing about biblical fiction is that for a lot of people, they can be kind of intimidated when they think about approaching it or reading it, and I get that. I totally get that. Biblical fiction can be a tricky genre. So if you want to know what biblical fiction is, I have a video about that. I'll try to link it in the description box below if you're interested. But basically, biblical fiction is a genre or a subgenre within Christian historical fiction, which is about stories that take place during Bible time. They can either be about a biblical character, for instance, since I have it here, the Pharaoh's daughter or its sequel Miriam are about the Pharaoh's daughter and Miriam from Exodus, obviously. It can be about a biblical character, but the biblical character might not be the main character of the story. For instance, Out from Egypt series by Connell and Cosette is a series about Israelites who escaped Egypt during, the plagues and all that. I don't know why I'm having such a loss of words right now. Moses appears in that story, but he's not a main character. All the main characters are fictional characters, if that made sense. And it can also be perhaps the Silent Years series by Angela Hunt. The Silent Years by Angela Hunt actually are referenced in the Bible, but we don't know much about them because obviously it's the Silent Years, which means those books take place between the last part of the Old Testament and the first part of the New Testament, because if you don't know, there was a giant gap there when there were no prophets, no one was speaking or writing anything down, and God was silent from the nation of Israel. So those are kind of the three main types of biblical fiction, depending on what you're interested in. I tend to like more of Connell and Cosette's style, where it's a fictional book with fictional characters that experience biblical events, but I also do have a real soft spot for ones where the biblical character is the main character of the story. But it's important that you read all biblical fiction with a good mind and a little bit of wisdom and thought as you're reading it, so that's what I'm talking about today. I'm going to be referencing The Pharaoh's Daughter by Misu Andrews a lot in this video because I've reread this book so many times that it's one that I feel like I can adequately refer to in multiple different scenarios. And I've read almost all of I've read all but one actually of Misu Andrews' books, so that's why I'm going to be diving into this one today, because this is one that I can really refer to a lot. If you're interested in biblical fiction recommendation videos, I also have those, which I will also try to leave in the description box below, but you can always go and search on my channel if you're looking for something more specific. So again, just briefly, this book is about the mother of Moses, or the adoptive mother of Moses, the one who drew him from the Nile and then raised him in Pharaoh's palace until, eventually his lineage was known and he escaped to the desert, and they wrote an awesome musical about it, animated by DreamWorks. You should go watch that. But the first thing I do when I'm looking to find a new biblical fiction book, this was actually the first biblical fiction novel I read. So the first thing I do when I'm looking to find some new biblical fiction is I first go and I try to find acknowledgments or the praise, where other authors will say, oh, this book was great, this book was researched. And if I know any of the other authors, pastors or theologians who've praised this book, and I know kind of what their beliefs are and stuff, then I think to myself, oh, this might be a great book for me to read. I might really enjoy this. I also try to read the acknowledgments if I don't know the author, so that I can get to know the author a little bit better and kind of, figure out, okay, why did they decide to write this story? What was put on their heart that they felt like writing this story specifically? I love this book in particular because it has charts and maps in the front couple of pages that really just help you connect what we know and what we know about this story and what we know about the Bible to the fictionalized part of that story. I think that that's really helpful. Not all biblical fiction novels do that. It's kind of an as-needed thing, and it's also, I think, by choice between the author and the publisher. I think that's really helpful. For instance, this one has like the line of the pharaohs and the family trees and whatnot, as well as a map of Egypt where the story takes place. And of course, I love that this book also has a note to the reader, which is essentially the author talking to the reader and being like, hey, so I just want to let you know where I got my research for this book done. Let you know the sources, how I came about using this book, why I'm using, these sources over other sources, how I did my research. Because when I read biblical fiction novels, I want to know that it's well researched. I want to know that, it's not going to be just a load of fiction overlaying what I know about the Bible, because that's just not cool in my opinion. And what I love about Misu Andrews' books in particular is that they are so well researched, and I love that she writes these author's notes and whatnot and notes to the reader, because I think that's really helpful as a reader to know, okay, how did they draw this conclusion? Why did they choose to place this story at this time period over another time period? Because we know the Bible doesn't exactly provide exact dates for a lot of events. It doesn't give you exact names of which pharaoh it was. These are things that the author has to do research on, and that's why they kind of have this disclaimer at the beginning where, they're very obviously stating, hey, I'm not claiming that I know everything. I'm not claiming that I was there, but this is where I got my research from. And then, of course, at the end of the book, after you've already read it, there's also discussion questions, which can kind of help you draw and apply the lessons from the book to your own life, as well as an author's note, which is different from a note to the reader. A note to the reader prefaces the book. The author's note provides you with closure at the end, if that makes sense. But this one has a lot more to do with how she read the Bible verses, which Bible verses she found most helpful in writing this book, which resources she went through, how she, approached this, where she did all her research and whatnot. And I think that's very helpful. And I really do like reading. I often read these notes before I read the actual book, because I want to be able to know in my head, okay, which part of this is fact, which part of this is fiction, which part of this is the Bible, and how do all of those things come together. Misu Andrews writes with that 3-layered approach of making note of all the biblical information we know, all of the historical facts we know, and then fiction being the thread that binds those two things together. So I think a common misconception with biblical fiction is that it's just taking a little bit of something from the Bible and then adding a bunch of fiction over it to create an interesting story. And I think well-done fiction is exactly how she describes it, which is biblical truth being one fabric, one piece of cloth, historical facts being another piece of cloth, and fiction being the little thread that binds those two things together in order to create a story. If I'm trying out a new author, I will often have a Bible. There are 2 Bibles on the nightstands of our bed right now, conveniently. I will often pull out a Bible as I'm reading, just so I can compare what the Bible is actually saying and read. Maybe if they've referenced verses, I can read those verses as well and kind of draw my own interpretations, if you will. A lot of people, when I say, oh, I love biblical fiction, I have received some heat for people saying, well, you should be reading the Bible, not biblical fiction. And I think that that's kind of, to me, that kind of hurts my feelings, because in my own life and in my own experiences, I haven't always been able to read the Bible clearly with understanding so much. I haven't always been able to approach the Bible with excitement and be like, oh yeah, I want to read about the genealogies of Noah because that's exciting. Sometimes for me, it takes a lot of effort to dig into the scripture and to dig into the word myself, and also to understand what's going on, because sometimes the Bible has really complex stories like David and Saul, and that's, a lot of drama and a lot of notes and back and forth and things that are happening, and it's hard for me to put together in my brain sometimes and connect, which is why when I discovered biblical fiction, I really found it so helpful, because it helped bring the Bible to life for me in a way that I maybe wouldn't have understood before. So for instance, this is kind of going on a wild goose chase, but I had a history teacher when I was in high school who we would talk about the Revolutionary War and whatever, and a bunch of the students would fall asleep in class, and then at the end of the week, he always showed us a movie that took place during the Revolutionary War. Another example would be, this one's kind of silly, but we were talking about piracy and the history of pirates 1 week, one lesson, one term, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. And again, a lot of the students just don't really connect well to just reading a history textbook. So at the end of the week, he would play Pirates of the Caribbean, and it would help engage the students in what they were learning. As silly of a movie as it was, people were actually able to go like, oh, hey, I know why Jack Sparrow wears coal around his eyes, because pirates believed at that point that it shielded your eyes from the bright light of the sun and enhanced your vision and allowed you to see farther out. Because it was a way of being able to mix historical facts that we knew with something else that we could tangibly understand, like a film, or in this case a book, where it presents it in a narrative that maybe your brain might connect with more. The same principle is kind of used when Jesus in the New Testament taught through parables, because sometimes principles themselves are difficult to understand, but we understand them better when they're told in a story, like in parables or things like that. Which is why I loved biblical fiction so much, because sometimes I didn't always understand what the Bible was trying to tell me until I discovered biblical fiction, and I found that it deepened my understanding and helped me learn more and apply those things more and kind of connect the dots between history and the actual meaning of the story more. And I think it's when people have said to me, oh, well, you need to read the Bible, not biblical fiction. It's kind of like, well, what if biblical fiction is what motivates me to read the Bible more? Because oftentimes I will finish a biblical fiction book, like the time that I finished The Pharaoh's Daughter, and I immediately felt like, okay, now I want to go and read the Bible story. I want to read the Bible's account of this, because I think I can understand it a little bit better and draw those conclusions a little bit better now that I've kind of seen it in more of a fictionalized version, in a narrative style version in my mind. That kind of thing excites me. I think it is important to read biblical fiction informed about the Bible, as I try to read the Bible alongside me and bring it with me and kind of reference it as I read a biblical fiction novel, to make sure that you are also, comparing, you're enjoying the story that's being told, but you're also being comprehensive of what the Bible is telling you and what the Bible says. That's kind of something that helps me separate the two in my head. Whereas I love biblical fiction and it brings the Bible to life for me, having the Bible alongside biblical fiction allows me to kind of separate the two, but keep that alive feeling in my mind, if that made any sense at all. Another reason that I always try to have a Bible near me and open to the kind of story that I'm reading especially is also because sometimes something might happen in a biblical fiction novel that might just be like, did that really happen? And the Bible will kind of confirm to you, yes, this did happen according to the Bible, or yes, this did happen according to a historical account, or maybe, no, that didn't happen in the Bible. Maybe you should go and research that author a little bit more. Maybe you should go and read reviews to see if this is, something that's going to do more harm than good in your mind. Because is biblical fiction really doing you any good if it's not telling you the Bible story and pointing you towards God? My answer to that would probably be no. It's not going to help you if it's not going to help you grow closer to God. For me, biblical fiction helps me grow closer to God because it motivates me to study His Word more and sort of dig out the facts and kind of figure out, okay, how much of this is true? How much of this is fiction? What do we know? It motivates me to do more study, and I'm really big into study anyways. I always have been kind of a nerd in school when it came to history lessons, so maybe that's just that part of me that just lights up at that kind of thing. If it's not going to motivate me to study the Bible more, then maybe it's not the best choice for me. If it's not going to point you more towards God, it might not be the best choice for you. And also, I think that everyone is at different levels in their spiritual life, which can also account for, how much of the Bible or what you should be reading. Some people set limits for themselves. For instance, in high school, I've done another video on this. In high school, I lost my grandma, and it really kind of threw me for a loop, and it sent me to this really dark place mentally where I was just kind of sad and depressed all the time and not really understanding why I was in the world. What's the point of life? And at that time, I was reading a lot of secular fiction, and it just wasn't putting many good thoughts in my head. Now, I'm not saying that secular fiction is bad and all secular fiction should be burned. Heavens no. For a lot of people, they really enjoy that kind of thing, and that's okay. But for me, in that place that I was spiritually, I couldn't handle reading secular fiction because it just brought me to a darker place. So I made a commitment from that point forward to only read Christian fiction, and that really strengthened my spiritual life. Some people will only read certain genres of Christian fiction or certain authors that they already know they like because some subject matter just might not make them comfortable. Everyone's at different walks. Everyone has different relationships with God. And for you, a book might be okay to read, but for another person, it might make them stumble. So I think also reading is a very personal choice, and reading biblical fiction is a very personal choice. And that's why I don't approach biblical fiction lightheartedly. I really do approach it with like a heart to learn, a heart to study, a heart to also find a way to worship the Lord through what I'm reading, and a heart to, dig deeper into the scriptures through what I'm reading. Not just to read a fun story and believe everything I hear. The discussion questions, the devotionals that go alongside, the research, the author's notes in biblical fiction have probably helped me more than actually the novel itself learn more about the Bible and learn more about God. And that's what I love so much about biblical fiction. That's how I read biblical fiction. If you have any questions about biblical fiction or thoughts you'd like to share, do drop them in the comment section below. If you like this video, I know it was a long one, but be sure to give it a thumbs up before you leave. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and check out all my other social media links in the description box below. I have a blog where I review books as often as I can, and you can find me pretty much anywhere on social media at Jenna Van Mourik. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!